You're listening to Permission to Shine, the podcast by Sherisse Bisram. The Oxford Dictionary describes permission as the action of officially allowing someone to do a particular thing, consent, authorization. What if you were that someone and you gave yourself the permission to be everything you wanted to be and more? No more playing small and accepting less than. You are worthy of the life of your dreams, regardless of what it is that you've been through. And honestly, it's exactly what you've been through that has shaped you into the version of yourself that you are now. Like a diamond, you've endured so much, but instead of breaking, you have become stronger and brighter. And if that's not a reason to shine, then I don't know what is. And if nature can do it, then why the hell can't you? You are brave, you are strong, you are powerful, and you are enough. Hear my call and give yourself the permission to shine, because you don't realise how many people are inspired by your light. Like, share, follow, subscribe, and listen out for more. Stay tuned. Hi everyone, this is episode 17. I know, 17 already. And I'm so honoured and grateful to have my long lost friend from the past. I say lost, you're not lost. Helen Victoria. Yeah, exactly that. But we kind of astrayed, didn't we, a little bit, you know, like through life and things like that. And then we stayed connected from afar. And I was like, I need to have I need to have Helen on the podcast. That was it. Helen and podcast combined. Holland. New thing. Yeah, no, it's so lovely to have you and to just see you. We said that, didn't we, at the start of when we were recording? I was like, oh, it's just nice to see each other.
Yeah, definitely. I think because we've sort of when did we go to college? Like 12, 13 years ago or something. Like
I know, yeah, long time.
And then since then, just like kept in touch, like the ever beloved voice note, which I don't know what I'd do without voice notes, actually. If nobody had invented them, I would have been terrible at keeping in touch with anyone. So I'm really glad that we have them. Yeah, so it's nice to have like.
And I feel like as well, we didn't really speak much at college. It was more after, wasn't it? Like we'd bump into each other at class all the time, and then it would just, we kind of just formed a little friendship from there, didn't we?
And also at the beginning, we were both on that, like, maybe I could dance on a cruise ship, like, thing.
Yeah.
and then actually both of us went off on our own ventures of what we wanted to do and figured out actually what we wanted to, that we enjoyed dancing wise and what actually made us happy, rather than just falling into the everybody goes to cruise ship auditions, like,
oh my gosh,
yes. So
this is literally what I talk about so much as well, is that kind of like one size fits all rhetoric that we've been told as dancers, you know, and it takes away our individuality. So that's why a lot of like the work I do now with dancers is about that. It's like, what is your identity? What are you good at? And let's celebrate that, because I feel like that was never a thing, was it? It was just, we were all just like a sheep in the herd, rather than actually being celebrated individually. And I feel like that, you know, I love dance, still a massive part of my life, but I still feel like that now when I look at the dance industry. We are like flocking in to be one of many instead of really being on your own, you know. And I think that's something that really shaped my whole viewpoint on dance, especially like in the pandemic when I was doing all of my own like healing journey. I was like, am I like, I've fought so hard to be like everyone else, but maybe I'm just meant to be like me, and that's okay. And that's why I've never really fit in. No.
You know what else I realised as well, loads from actually dancing and doing jobs and contracts. I had this like vision at dance college, like if I could just do like, or actually throughout my dance career, I'd sort of had these moments of like, if I can get in that show, then I'll be really happy and I'll feel like I've like used my training and it'll all be worth it or whatever. And then actually, genuinely, the shows that made me the happiest, I loved the most, were like my smallest, worst paid, like not very significant shows. And some of the bigger shows that I did, just it didn't have that like glimmering, like life affirming thing that I was like waiting for, like all these big life goals you might have, or like, oh, if I just get to this level in the computer game, then I'll feel really good about myself. But it never actually really did. And some of the bigger shows were the more stressful, like less fulfilling ones. Like I did a show in Birmingham which had about 20 people in the audience for a circus company I was working with at the time. And it was like all special needs audience, and it was such a magical show, and it was so great. It's one of my favorite memories, and I got paid almost nothing for it, and it was like just a community show that's like not particularly anything. And then I did like, you know, the tours in America and like all these big shows, And actually the memories that stand out are the ones that I never actually planned for. Like I'd never have thought, oh, that's where I want to head. And actually they're the ones that made me the happiest.
Yeah.
So
It
you don't
takes
really
that
know that.
pressure.
Yeah.
And I think that's it, because that's what we love to do is dance, but we add all the extra conditionalities to it, which takes away that joy, doesn't it? So I guess in that space, you were just doing it for the love of it more than anything
Yeah.
else.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
that's kind of why we went to dance college. You know, like I didn't go in even thinking I'd ever end up working. And because I was in a complete different place when I started dance college and didn't think I'd be able to dance after it. So because the relationship I was in at the time, it was like there was not going to be an option for me to go away anywhere or actually pursue it. But my partner at the time was like basically permitted that I could go to college as long as I could get it out of my system, like just dance at college and then you're done. And I was like, okay. So I agreed to this mad plan, thinking I don't even care. I just want to dance for as long as I can. And if it's only 2 or 3 years, then I'll do that. But then during that time at college, the relationship ended. And then I was like, oh, actually, maybe I could actually do this as a job. And it totally spun it on its head. And then it led to a completely different path. But I almost just started college just because it just made me so happy. And I was quite unhappy at the time. But it was like my happy place was dancing in a studio.
Yeah. And isn't that the beautiful thing about like the universe and life, that it always steers you in the right direction? And I think this is probably a good point now to kind of, because I feel like we've just gone straight into the chat.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's probably a good thing for us now to sort of give yourself an introduction on like what it is you've done in terms of like dancer, author, you know, like all of these things that you do, and tie you in and then go back to your story. And I think, you know, I said at the beginning that before we start recording about maybe this one should be about love and about your relationships, because I think this is really what shaped you. So, yeah, let's start with who you are, what you do, what you've done, and your story.
So, I mean, I started out as a dancer from college, and then so I was in a really awful relationship from the ages of 15 to 23 with my ex-partner, and it steadily over that time became more and more abusive, more and more controlling, and it ended up being a very violent, unsafe relationship, which coincided towards the end of like when I started dancing and creativity and writing became like a freedom, often hidden from him because it made him unhappy with me, but it was something that gave me freedom. And then when the relationship ended, I was in a really, really negative space, desperately trying to find a way up and out always, but just was absolutely, I think almost, I mean, heartbroken sounds like such a like, I don't know, teen movie phrase, but I was just broken. I was completely exhausted. And then trying to face tackling things with, there's a police case and legal stuff, and there's all this stuff that just felt so beyond anything I knew anything about, but I was suddenly needing to be an expert of in my own life, while trying to balance just the simple endeavor of trying to be a dancer. And then, yeah, my first contract was in Marrakesh for 7 months straight out of college. And I started writing a blog called Journey to Liberty, it was called at the time. And it was just not for anybody else. It was just like, I wrote articles because it made me feel good. And it was about documenting my discovery of freedom. And so it was all journey too. And I had this like idea back then that I'd have this like Liberty dance or art center, and it would make other people have a space where they could feel free. And it was sort of supposed to be, every article was like a step towards that thing. But actually, as time went on, I kind of realized that the life I was living was the freedom. And instead of working towards freedom, I could kind of find it in my own current day. So I changed the title of the blog to Living Liberté. And yeah, over the years, I mean, I wrote the blog for about 10 years. And over that time, it developed like a really big readership. And then towards the end of my dance career, I developed it into a social enterprise. So during lockdown, I was doing sort of voluntary mentoring, and I was doing signposting to other organisations that could help young women that were stuck in really toxic relationships. And I got funding to go to America and New Zealand, which I still am intending on doing, to research relationship education in schools. And it just kind of blew up and ended up being what the main thing that I did. And when I stopped dancing, Living Liberty was like my main focus. But yeah, and then everything's kind of, it feels like strange talking about it now, because it's still something I'm really, really passionate about, but it's not what I'm doing now. So I had intentions, well, after I had my son 2 years ago, that I would go back to it, and I had all these big plans, but life sort of naturally changed quite a lot in the last couple of years. And so I'm not like Living Liberty is currently just, you know, all the resources I created and everything are still online, they're still there, and occasionally I still get someone who, you know, asking for support and I signpost them, but for now it's like stayed where it was and it hasn't carried on into the future, which I never would have imagined. But yeah, that's kind of in a quite big nutshell kind of like where I'm at now.
But I think it's really nice because I feel like this underlying thread is the reason that you are doing what you're doing and why you're here and who you are, you know, that I feel like our life experiences really shape us into the versions of ourselves that we are now. And inevitably, I almost feel like you went through this like metamorphosis period of Living Liberty to now be in a space where, you know, it's just flying free. And I think that there doesn't need to be a tire and intentional when that picks up again. I think that work is always echoing through who you are, and you are the living embodiment of the success of what that is. So I think it's a really nice space that you're in just in general, because, you know, the fact that you have found a stable relationship, you're in a deep love, you know, you have, you know, children, it's like all of these beautiful things that are byproducts of just deep, beautiful love. And obviously sometimes it's not, but for your story it is. And I think, you know, I'd love to like dive back in further almost to like the type of partners that you're attracting almost, because you know, knowing you for all this time, I feel like there was definitely a pattern, wasn't it? And I think in my work now, it's all about us unpacking that pattern and how and why and all of these things. So it'd be interesting for us to walk through that and then just find the points in which it changed, because that'd be nice for the listeners to understand if they're going through a similar thing.
Well, it was a bizarre thing because I ended up being an expert on in my work with Living Liberty on something that I knew a lot about. And I was, you know, obviously my experiences with my first relationship and actually my second one, which was a significant one also, you know, I could spot patterns. I could tell you everything you need to know about red flags and about the sort of message you put out about yourself and empowerment and about like all these different things. And I spoke publicly about it. I wrote about it extensively, but still, I think I will still say now, it took meeting my partner now to fully get it about what a healthy relationship is, because I knew all the theory and I had healthy relationships in my friendships and with my family, and I felt like I was saying out loud and like I was sort of believing that I was open to healthy relationships and healthy love, but still dating a very similar kind of guy, going through similar sort of things, and still basically running into myself every time, being like, how have I fallen into the same conversation with just a different version of the same person? So somehow I was still in the same cycles, and I was getting frustrated with it because I was telling myself, well, I'm dating different kinds of people and, you know, I'm different now. But actually it did take until I had an experience of a genuinely healthy relationship where there was no I don't know, trying to prove myself or trying to explain who I was to the point that it's exhausting until somebody starts to see it, because actually they're never going to see it. And definitely, I think I had to have first-hand experience to actually heal the last part of what I wasn't really seeing. Like there was definitely like a blind spot in how I was behaving in relationships or dating that I felt like I couldn't overcome. And I'd done loads of work to feel more confident, and I'd sort of grown so much as a person. But I think actually meeting the partner I'm with now and realizing it is just the best version of a friendship. And that was like the click, like, oh, this shouldn't feel like a game of chess. It should feel like a chilled game of, I don't know, anything that you enjoy, like just something where you're on an even keel and I'm not having to like navigate in the relationship or like work out the best thing to say or, you know, like to overthink it. And that's when it sort of changed, and I've sort of still been learning it ever since. And I think part of this, I mean, I would never have imagined that Living Liberty would be a lesser presence in my life as it is now. But also there's been great healing in not always talking about what happened before and actually embracing like the now and the future. And I've met lots of good friends here in Devon. I moved to Devon a couple of years ago, And, you know, I meet people now just as like Helen that used to be a dancer who's Isaac's mum. And it's actually quite nice not having, and then there's this thing and this story and this attachment and this history and these achievements and that all the stuff is actually quite freeing to just be the Helen that I am now and not attached to all these other stories, which was a hard thing. And I think I had to spend a lot of time talking myself through guilt because I felt bad. I felt like I'd made this amazing thing that supported lots of people, and I felt like I was letting people down by not continuing to expand it, because, you know, there's all these organizations offering me funding to bring it into schools and to do more and do more and do more, and somehow like it just didn't feel right to keep expanding it. And I felt like, you know, I had to look at that and let go of like this sort of, I don't know if it's ego or guilt or whatever it came with it, or like sort of some sort of commitment to my younger self that I would do better. And actually just doing better now is just setting an example of what a healthy relationship is, teaching my son to treat women well, to the daughters of impending twins, that when I have my girls, that, you know, how we approach relationships and what's right and what I believe in, like that is its own legacy. So
absolutely, that, and that's exactly how I feel about your journey. 100% is that you, like I said, you're the embodiment of it now. And I think through living in integrity and in that aligned value of what it is that you were always trying to create, and now you're living, you know, even more on a deeper level, you know, like living liberty in that space, you know, and continuing to blog. But actually now it's like almost a step up from that, you know, it's like that like if it was to become a movie, like that's what you're living now, is like that end, the end scene, the happily ever after type of thing. And I really resonate with that, because I think it goes two ways, doesn't it, with like trauma stories and situations. Like we either wear it on our sleeve and we let everyone know about it, or no one knows about it. And I think both are toxic. So like finding that middle ground where you don't have to wear a badge that says, "Hi, I'm traumatized." That I feel like that's the space, isn't it? And I think it's so hard with relationships, especially because I didn't realize myself that through like the trauma wounds that I had and the protection that I gave myself, I just always thought that I'd put love on a back burner. I just thought, oh no, I've been focused on my career. And actually what I realize now is that no, the fact that I didn't want to open up my heart to someone is me actually in trauma the whole time. So I'm thinking this whole time that, oh, you know, like I've never really had any worries with relationship because I never let myself open up. So it's this thing that we are all in, you know, regardless of gender or sexual orientation. It is about like, ultimately, as human beings, we want to give and receive love. And I think that's where it becomes so like scary, doesn't it, at times, you know, especially in those situations where we are putting ourselves out there and we are wanting to meet someone, and then the same patterns keep coming through. And I think for me, like this almost reflects to my work in the sense of like, I always say that your universe is a mirror. So, you know, it's almost like what you said there about you were healing all these layers, but still a part of you was attracting the same type of person. And there's Pavel Hendricks, I don't know if you've read his stuff before, but he's got this theory called imago theory. And it's basically that your inner child sees the wounds of another person's inner child, and that's what connects you. And it's like that trauma bonding thing. But equally, you're meant to, in a healthy relationship, if you find that, is to reparent each other. So it becomes like a healthy version of what that should be. But equally, if you are so traumatized and wounded and still living in that wound, you're attracting that person that's still living in their wound. And that's why nothing grows beautifully there, because you're both just growing weeds and it ends up being a field of abandonment, you know. So it's just, that's why this, I think for me, that the doing the work on yourself is important. But you've always been an advocate of that anyway, you know. So there's layers, isn't it? It's so deep.
And actually, there was definitely patterns, like there's friendships that have ended in the last 2 years in my life that some of them, they just faded. Like it was just like, I realized that I was doing a lot of legwork. And when I didn't have as much time, because I'm like working full time, I've got a kid, like a million other life commitments. Like I just didn't have the time to make as much effort and to be there for them 24/7. And those relationships just, like they just went, and you kind of realize, oh, maybe we weren't as good of friends as I thought, maybe I was just quite useful. And then there was like a few sort of what I'd call friendship breakups, like, you know, where we'd fall out because things had changed, particularly in one particular friendship where they they weren't that comfortable with the fact that I'd changed my situation. So before, we were both kind of crashing around on the dating scene, like we were sharing terrible anecdotes of like awful experiences. We were on the same level. And then when I met a partner and was making different choices and wanted to like just live in a more chilled way, and it wasn't as chaotic, and we just basically, I don't know, there was friction, which I couldn't understand at the time, because I didn't feel like they didn't need it to be. But looking back on those situations now, it's like I can kind of almost think there were friendships that I was picking up, which were just mini versions of the relationships I was choosing. So although I was, you know, and was really confident that I was making really great friendships, and I did, and there's some that have existed, and say like even your connection, you and I, like we can go months and months and months without speaking, but if you have a genuine care for the other person, you respect the fact that they're busy, and you know, and you just look forward to the next time you're going to talk. It's not a pressure of I haven't heard from you from this long, and you know, it's not about making the other person feel responsible for what's gone wrong. And you know, and it's just Absolutely. I've just learned so much, even in how my friendships have changed in the last couple of years, because it all just spreads out, you know, like how the behaviors and like even the way I was feeling, like when that person didn't want to be part of my life anymore, I reacted in the same way that I had before, and feeling that like urgency to want to fix it and to get in touch, and maybe if I just explain, and maybe if I just do this. And then when I stepped away from it, I was like, oh, that's interesting, I'm doing exactly the same thing, even though I was I've been in a healthy relationship with Rich for several years, though that little habit was still there somewhere of like seeking approval, but only if you sit with it for a little bit is it being able to see it. But most people, like you were saying with your experiences, it's not comfortable to look at the stuff that we're doing that isn't great, you know, or that we maybe need to remedy, because then you have to do something about it. Whereas if you can kind of feed yourself a narrative for long enough and strong enough, this is fine, this is why I'm doing this, I'm really career driven, this is why, you know, you just keep feeding yourself with reasons, then that can last quite a long time. People go their whole lives doing that. So
100%. And it's only when, like for me, when I hit that brick wall of the pandemic and I had to do the healing work, I was like, oh wow, okay, everything's crumbling. I've built that's it. I've literally built my life on a foundation of like just unsturdy ground, and now it's all crumbling. I'm like, that makes sense. But it's funny because I remember when you were going through that process, and it is just that, isn't it? You know, that. And isn't it funny for me? Like I always think that trauma, regardless of where it comes from or like where it stems from, in terms of like, is it childhood, is it relationships, the same patterns exist in everything. Like my need to prove myself and to get validation came from my sense of working really hard, which I know that you obviously had to an extent as well. And not in a romantic sense. But then I noticed a few times when I look back at like sort of situationships that I'd had, I did do that to an extent. And it's funny, isn't it? Because when you make peace with the whole of you, there is no need to validate yourself, and you don't need to prove yourself to anyone. And I think I say that so many times, and I know that people listening are probably thinking, oh yeah, I've heard that before, but it really is that simple. And I can't stress that enough. Like the moment that we give ourselves that acceptance to like let go of everything else that we think we need to be, and we just show up as we are, that's when the right people come in. That's when the right relationships exist. Totally. And these low maintenance friendships, like I have a whole ton of low maintenance friendships, but the bond and the quality of the conversation is always so rich, because it's just that mutual love for that person, regardless of how long it goes or whenever it is. It's like that respect level is so deep. But equally, I think that comes from each person's individuality as well, you know, like because you have a respect and a mutual love for yourself, you're always going to project that back to the person. So when it's you know, you changed out of that cycle, which I noticed for myself, you know, I have this saying that I do believe that a lot of people in my life that I'm no longer close with or friends with anymore like me better broken. And I think it's that, isn't it? You know, when you are healing or healed to an extent, obviously we're always healing, but you know, when you get to that version of yourself, when you look back and you're not the version of yourself you were a couple of years ago, you can see clearly like how and why. And I think that's why self-awareness is such a big thing, like a massive thing. I'm like I've got a billboard up everywhere, self-awareness, do it. And why I believe doing the work is so important. But I guess
also like there was a moment where like I think I had a certain narrative, partly from Living Liberty, like I wrote about it, and like I had this like a public speaking like sort of explanation, like intro thing that I would say every time, and I said the same things. And there was like history of domestic violence in my family, and this thing happened, and then that thing, and I would, I had this like literally a story, which was the true story. But I examined it, and like more recently, and like I think I've changed a lot in terms of I don't think I was like bitter, like blaming, like, oh, this thing happened and then that, because this thing happened to me. But there was definitely a through line of like me giving the power over to the people that had hurt me before. And yes, I built this brilliant thing of Living Liberty in spite of, and sort of like I wanted to make a positive from such a negative, and that's all really positive. But I realized like the massive value in also taking responsibility for my part in it. So instead of just being like, oh, I met this guy when I was 15, which I did, and I was very naive, which I was, and he was much older, and I believed everything he said, and I fell for him completely. And obviously it was not a healthy dynamic from the beginning. And I can definitely trace, and from an outside view, it's like textbook psychology. So I kind of describe it like it happened to me, but also by taking back my responsibility of like, I chose to stay in that relationship day after day after day, and then I chose to leave. Like eventually I left, and yes, it was horrendous and traumatic, and I didn't really have a choice, and it was what it was, but I did leave. And by taking responsibility of like, right, I did meet this person, I did trust them, this is what happened, why did I do that, what was making me want to stay? Because there was not just red flags, it was like banners. He was practically wrapped in a red flag, and I was like, this is fine. And by looking at like, why did I choose that person, and why did I keep choosing that person, and when they did this, why did I still go back in the house and ask for more, why did I do this? And it helped me to realize like I'd been responsible for it. And it sounds odd because I wouldn't ever like, it's a hard thing because it can be easily misconstrued of like, oh, victims blaming themselves. It's not about that. It's like saying I was present, acknowledging how I felt, why I was feeling that way. And, why was it that when this like knight in shining armor turned up, apparently when I was 15, did I leap on it for validation? Was because I was a really insecure teenager who desperately wanted to be liked and appreciated and somehow fit in, because I didn't feel that way as a teenager. And he was just telling me all the right things, and I leapt on it. So it's like, by looking at why and where that came from, it gave me a lot of understanding, which helped release a lot of attachment to that story, and just thinking, that it was where I was at. But it's like understanding it beyond that, almost looking beyond the beginning of the story of like, I met this guy, this bad thing happened. It's like, well, what was happening before that?
Absolutely.
That, and why, and it's the same when I met my second relationship, this guy in America, great guy. One of the first things he did we were at like a party. I was working for a circus company at the time in the States on tour, and he walked into the like trailer, the circus trailer thing that we were in. There was like a after party. He was visiting a cousin of his who was on my show, and I was just sitting, everybody else was drinking, like having a good time, whatever, and I've never really been a big party person, and I was just sitting writing like a nerd, like I am, and just writing in my notebook and like just chilling, and I was just sitting there like in the corner, and he made a beeline over to me, asked me what I was writing, and I was like quite shy and like unsure, because he was really confident. He walked in playing his guitar and singing, not knowing anyone in the trailer, like just that confident. And he made a beeline for me because I probably looked like the quietest, easiest target, I guess, in the room. He would say otherwise, but I don't know. And as he was talking to me, he was like, you don't need to wear that makeup. You don't need that showgirl makeup. I want to see the real you. I want to see the real you. And I practically leapt into his arms, because I was like so desperate at that time in my life to feel seen and validated, and for someone to see beyond the show makeup and all this stuff. But really, looking back on it, he was just saying everything that he thought, but instead of, and I had an instinct that he wasn't a great guy, but I still was just desperate to hear somebody say, you're fine, I'm here, I'm not going anywhere. And, I just met him, and, we had a whirlwind relationship, and I wrote a lot in the years after about the concept of, there's that thing of a knight in shining armor, like sweeping you off of your feet. And it's like, if you think about it, if you were just walking along the road one day and somebody came up and swept you off your feet, you'd feel really imbalanced and a bit like overwhelmed. And actually, if somebody fell in step with you and started a conversation, you wouldn't feel intimidated. So actually, like, it sounds, we're all taught Disney princess stories and romances, and that this whirlwind feeling is what we're looking for. Actually, it's not about that. Like, you want somebody to fall in step with you, not sweep you off your feet, like leave you on your feet, your own feet. And it took me a long time to learn that, because I was looking for quick fixes. I wanted him to come along and make me feel less traumatized, and to just be able to wash away how I'd been feeling. And actually, I needed to do that work by myself. And there was, like, my partner now, he has no ability to heal all that stuff. I had to do it myself. So it's just taking responsibility for it and not looking for like a quick fix thing. But we're human and we crave companionship, and sometimes, like, our loneliest moments can be the most vulnerable, which is beautiful. But if you fall into the wrong hands, that's where it can get really unsafe.
Yeah, so, definitely.
Yeah.
No, that's a really beautiful way of explaining it, I think, to a lot of people as well, because it is so that, I think we're all looking for passion and drive and this fiery energy, which can come in a healthy relationship in balance. But you're so right that we're looking for someone to walk beside us. And I think that's it, isn't it? That's the goal. Even in friendship, it's like the people that are by your side are the ones that have your back the most, because actually, if someone's too far in front or too far behind you, they can't catch you. Whereas the people next to you can. And equally, if your feet are strong enough on the ground, you don't need to be caught. And I think that's a big part of it, isn't it? I think we're all looking for outside people to, like you said, fix us or heal us. But actually, this is my work, is we need to heal ourselves first, because then we're walking with solid feet on the ground, rather than, like one leg or hopping along, is actually that is all of that, isn't it? And I think that's such a beautiful thing. And I just, for me, it's lovely to see and hear as a friend, because I remember those times, like, from you and you being in America and being like, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, all of these crazy stuff was happening. And it's just it's wonderful to see.
Chaos. It was chaos. That relationship remained for about 2 years, in which time I think I just needed, it's like I would describe it not as love, despite what we said it was at the time. Like, it was just addiction. Like, it's like every quality of addiction was present in that relationship. Like, from cutting him off and swearing off him and saying I'm never going to speak to him again, and I'm never going to answer the phone to him, and saving his name in my phone as do not answer. And then, I'd get a text from him like a week later or something from like a different number. And the thrill and the adrenaline, like the physical, like, I would remember shaking with excitement, the fact that he got in touch. And then it's like the phone would be ringing and I'd think, I shouldn't answer. But it's like I had to get another hit of it, and I'd answer. And then, it'd all be dreamy and rosy, and we'd, fly across the world to see each other another time, and then inevitably fall out and it'd be horrendous. And then it would all go around again. And it's like I had to just go through that cycle so many times until eventually I had to, again, stop blaming him for it and being like, oh, he's really toxic, he's drawn me in, he's done this. It's like, well, actually, I'm the one buying the plane tickets, I'm the one getting on the plane. I therefore have the ability to not buy the ticket, not get on the plane. Like, he doesn't actually have power over me, I have power over me. And by taking back responsibility, it helped me, because then I could think, enough now, and then it was part of like a big point of moving forward. And I had to also pick the less, like, I don't know, movie moment exciting option. Like, I wanted to like move to Florida with my circus boyfriend and like live this wild life and all this stuff, and turns out the wild life's actually really stressful and chaotic. Actually, I moved to Oxford and then on to Birmingham, and I in Birmingham rented a 1-bedroom, like, it was a bedsit, didn't even have a bedroom, it was like a tiny, really shabby bedsit. But I paid for it myself, and it was peanuts because it was a really crappy flat. And but I lived in it by myself, and I made myself live alone without a man, without anything. And I just earned my own money, which wasn't very much. I was working for a circus company, like teaching and doing bits of performing, and lived like that for like 2 years. And I think that was one of the best decisions I made. It was the less glamorous option. It was the less exciting option. It involved a lot less, last minute runs to the airport and big moments. It was just gentle every single day, doing a similar thing, training, working hard, teaching, like just falling into step. And then at the end of that, I took a contract going to Belgium to do a show. And 6 weeks before that, before I left, I met Richard, who I've ended up being the absolute love of my life, and we're really happy together. And it was like I met him once I forced myself to like almost wean myself off my addiction of those kinds of that kind of life and my relationships, and that I had to just be on my own for a bit. And it wasn't always comfortable, and sometimes I'd get really tearful and think, I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm going to be single forever, and I don't know what job this is, and why am I doing this? But I had to live through all that and keep living it until eventually I was like, okay, I can do this, I'm good. And then that's when I met Rich. So
that's
like,
it.
Yeah.
And that really was that moment of, like I always talk about, like when that moment you gave yourself the permission to shine. And like what's beautiful in this for you is that your whole life was this egotistical shine. So actually the moment that you gave yourself pure, stable, grounded shine, that is when obviously everything starts to fall into place. And I think we unglamorize that, like it's not glamorized to do the inner work and sit there and, actually go to yoga every morning, even though it's early and we don't want to, and like, make your dinner from scratch, because actually one, you don't want to spend the money on it, but two, because you know what you're putting into your body. Like, it's all of these little things that we take for granted, but they are the power moments. And it's that saying, isn't it? It's all the little things. If you didn't sit there and be with yourself in that time and really know who you are again and know what you wanted for someone, someone like Rich could have just like gone past you wouldn't have even stopped to even think. So it's beautiful that life, although it's been turbulent and hard for you a lot of the time, has evolved in this such a way that you now have that liberty that you were searching for, which is so beautiful.
Instead of searching, I think sometimes like our greatest moments of like, I don't know, affirmation or like actual genuine peace, not just relaxation, but like actual peace, they're like the smaller moments that you just couldn't have expected for them to be that way. Like I wrote an article, it was my most read article, but all the ones I wrote on my blog, which was I'm living happily ever after, so why can't I breathe? And it was an article about how at the time I was living in New York, so I'd done the whole tour in America, and then I'd gone back on my own to be there for a summer on my own, but I was still sort of on and off with this guy, so then I'd like go to Florida every now and then. It was easier being in New York. But then I was on my own a lot, and I rented like a little teeny tiny, it was even worse than my flat in Birmingham, place in Queens, and I just sort of did the thing, and I was volunteering at a yoga center so I could get free classes, living on almost no money, but just going with it. But I was doing lots of bits of modeling, so just freelancing. I just emailed like loads of different people before I got there and tried to get some sort of performing work. And I did this amazing photo shoot, which was at like dawn in Central Park. And I was like, it's like a ballet themed, like sort of concept shoot thing. So I was like literally standing on point in the middle of this fountain, ruining my shoes. And like, I had like a makeup artist, and it's like really great photographer who's really excited about the shoot. And it was such a brilliant morning. I remember just thinking, oh my God, this is amazing. And like, even from just seeing the back of the camera, like the photos were amazing. And I was like, yes, because it was so fun. And then I went to Subway, I don't know, like 7:30 or something in the morning to head back to my apartment. And I got like some horrible text from the horrible guy I was dating. And as I got on the subway, I just had the biggest panic attack. Like I just couldn't breathe. I felt like the subway was closing in on me. I just was so panicked. Nobody knew what was going on. They probably thought I was on drugs. First thing in the morning, nobody really knew how to respond. And I remember just stumbling out of the subway and just running back for cover and just sort of basically staying in bed all day. And then the photographer sent me the pictures at some point in the afternoon that some of them he'd edited. And I went to post them on social media, and I thought, God, if I post these pictures, people are going to be like, oh, wow, Helen's living a dream life. Like, look at Helen, she's a ballet dancer in New York. Like, and it was true. And that was true of that moment. But I thought there's no way that anybody would have any concept of my actual whole day, which was actually, I needed to heal. I was a very traumatized person who wasn't dealing with her issues and was just pretending everything was fine. And I was just, it was an amazing moment. I'm really proud of that shoot, and I'm proud of all the work I did over my career. But, those moments don't fix it. It doesn't, and both things were true of me. Both of them were the real me. There's not that one was fake and that one was real. They're both real. But I wanted to give like a full perspective. So I wrote this article about, I'm living happily ever after, so why can't I breathe? And just wrote about the reality of it. And so many people responded particularly performers, in saying, God, yeah, I've just done the most amazing gig of my life as a singer, but I'm really suffering at the moment with, whatever they were struggling with at the time. And because the thing is, all these different aspects are all of ourselves, but obviously social media tends to be like a nice little tidied up version. And I just thought it was important to share that it wasn't my whole life experience. Like there was so much else going on, and people really related to it. And it's like, the moments now that make me the happiest. Like yesterday, after I picked up my son from nursery, and my partner had just got home, and we just hung out in the garden, and we're just like messing about doing bits of gardening, and just like had dinner outside, sat on the grass, and it was just like a really lovely time. And I thought, these are my like moments where I feel so fulfilled and happy and chilled. And I don't get a certificate for it. No one like applauds me. Like, they're really subtle, small moments. And actually catching up with a friend is just pure magic. And it's such a brilliant privilege to have, like a great friend that you can connect with. All these moments, and I know we get told it all the time, but also society and culture and everything else teaches us to like aim high all the time. And actually these small moments are some of our biggest achievements, but there's not really much to say about it. And Absolutely. So they just kind of get lost. But honestly, they're like, and I never, ever am ungrateful for a day of my life now. Like I remember how chaotic my life used to be. I remember how acutely unhappy I was for a long time. And I felt like I just survived the day sometimes. And now I like even just the littlest things I'm so grateful for. And so it's like, yeah, like I claim all of it. I'm like all of the messy, crappy bits and all of the great bits, because it's all part of the same fabric. It's the same tapestry. And you can't just like rub out these bits so that these bits are shinier,
No, it's all necessary, isn't it?
Yeah, all of it.
And I always say that about, like if you didn't have the lows, you wouldn't appreciate the highs. And I think that's why, in your life you've had some extreme lows. So the highs are like not even like high as in the up and down. It's like the stability is what's high. And I even said that to a really close friend of mine a year ago about she didn't know contentment. She didn't understand what that meant, and she couldn't understand why she felt like she needed to be doing something, but she wasn't sure. And I was like, you're in a space of safety. For the first time in your life, you feel safe and you're content. And she was like, oh my gosh, I'm content. Like, just overwhelmed with it. Because again, this life of performing especially, but, even in corporate, all of these things, it's the highs and lows that, with the adrenaline rush and all of that stuff. And it's putting our body into these heightened states of anxiety and the cortisol levels that don't need to be like that. And I think, the same with like yourself. I just feel like I'm learning more and more, even in my own healing journey, the beauty of transparency and just being like honest and vulnerable, and I feel like I was easing myself into that so much so over the last few years when I started the healing journey. But even like now more than ever, I feel like, and this is what I was going to say to you before we came on, it's that feminine energy. So I think when we're in the masculine energy, it's about the doing, right? The feminine energy is the being and accepting. And I think that's something that both of us probably didn't really have much of, because we're trying to survive in whatever setting we were both in. That survival thing was there for both of us. So I think it's so evident with you, especially being a mum, that's there because it's that's the natural way. But I think it's nice to just finally feel like, probably, I mean, you more so than I, but even myself, being in a position where we can just breathe out and be like, it's okay, no matter what happens, it's just okay. Doesn't need to be a mad rush or a crazy like whirlwind of like job to job as we were doing, middle of the night running to the next job. It doesn't need to be any of that, unless that's what you want, obviously. But it doesn't need to be a whirlwind. I think, like you said, dinner in the garden with your family, beautiful.
And just like spending time investing in the things that genuinely make you happy, and like not all of them have to be, God, I spent so many hours like tweaking my show reel, which is like this constant thing that I was tweaking every 5 minutes, and like I don't know, things like that are important, and I guess I need them for work and stuff. But like, it's almost like I remember like spending hours trying to like set my show reel, so like every single move would like hit a certain note of the song I'd chosen. Nobody casts based on how well you video edited. Like, what I mean?
I hold my hand up to that
She's
too.
got some lovely timing on that video edit. I think we'll hire her. Like, no one can send literally a silent film, and as long as your leg's like smacking you in the forehead, then that's fine. They'll hire you. Like, but it's just, I don't know. It felt like I was doing almost the same thing in that show reel that I was trying to do in real life. If I could just tweak a bit more, if I could just make that bit shinier, if I could just, and it's like, actually, sometimes it just doesn't have to be that perfect. Like, it's
Absolutely.
okay. Like, accept it as it is. That's it.
I think that's why we probably bonded so well at the beginning as well, because we both had that perfectionism, you know, that need to be perfect and do it right and get it perfect and all of these things. And I think that's what's nice, I think, probably where we're both at. I mean, obviously, like I keep saying, you more than I, because I'm still on my journey right now. To find my love. No, but also just, you know, the embodiment of what we're doing and like where we're at and all these beautiful things. But I think it's just nice to see you fully in that feminine flow, you know, because I think that's just what we all deserve to be in, you know, as humans, but especially as women, because we deny ourselves of that because of, you know, the patriarchal society that we live in, and that's what's validated. But actually we don't need any of those things. It's coming back to yourself, isn't it? And I think, you know, ultimately, like we're kind of saying all the way through this, it's that when you start listening to yourself and like taking accountability and doing the work to love yourself, that's when I think all of these things come in, isn't it? You know, like all of the
and it's like the people you surround yourself, it's sort of like I don't know which comes first, a bit of a chicken and egg thing, because the friends I've ended up with now have definitely, I would say, come off the back of me feeling more comfortable being myself and not having to explain myself all the time. And like I was saying, I feel more comfortable and just, I'm just in a good place. So then some of those friendships that weren't healthy have naturally fallen away. And then people have definitely come into my life. Like, there's a group of mums, basically, there's like just a few of us that we did the same antenatal class when I first moved to Devon. I mean, I literally joined it just so I could make friends, because I had like no friends here. And they've ended up being so significant in my life, like partly because we've sort of gone through this thing at exactly the same time. But they're just really great women that, like, even aside from being mums and like having kids and whatever, we just really connect. And I never feel like I have to explain myself to them or apologize for not texting back quick enough or over explain, which I think I felt like I did a lot in previous times. And or, you know, I just don't have that pang of like where they'll text and I'll think, oh God, I haven't replied, what they're going to think, like any of that negative stuff. And I'm like, I feel like they came into my life when I was ready for those sort of friendships.
Absolutely.
But also, I was attracting the right people too. And I know how to invest in those relationships without them becoming toxic and without them becoming codependent. Like, I know how to build friendships better now. And even that is just a skill. Like, you know, we all sort of lollop along at school and try and do our best, and sort of we tend to cling to a girl gang and think like, right, okay, these are my people, I'm okay now. And sometimes those people don't stay your people, and that's okay. Like, we don't have to all be like best friends with the people that we grew up with, because who I was when I was 15 or 12 or whatever is very different to where I'm at now. And like, that's okay. You don't have to cling on to what worked before, or, you know. And some friendships, it's not that, you know, they were particularly like toxic to cut off immediately, like this awful terrible thing, but it's just you naturally have fallen out of step with each other, like we were saying about falling into step before. And like, that's all right. And, you know, we all go through different phases of life at different times. And I think, you know, I've got a few friendships that have remained, that have been there a long time. And I think fundamentally those people, we sort of are in alignment in terms of principles. So like you and I are very much aligned. Like, we live completely different lives. Like, we live in different places. We've like pursued different things within sort of the same sphere, but in quite different areas. But our principles are the same. And actually, that's what's happened in my relationship with the guy I'm with now, is we're quite different. Like, I'm a performer and like I'm quite like confident and like, well, I'm more of like an outgoing person, and he's much more like chilled and has much like a mellow energy a lot of time. But then when we're together, I tend to bring out more of an outgoing side of him, he tends to bring out the more chilled side of me. But, you know, there's loads of things that we don't have in common, but we completely align on our morals and principles and like how we see the world. And that's the important bit. And like, you know, like dating profiles and Bumble, I was a frequent user of Bumble before. Like, you know, you list your interests. You're like, oh, I don't know, whatever people are into, like movies, or I like this kind of food, or I like this or like that. It doesn't actually really matter whether none of those things line up. It matters whether you agree in terms of your principles. So if you know, are a strong feminist and that person isn't, you're just not going to, it's just not going to connect. Or if somebody has had a certain life experience and you've had a similar one and you can relate, that's what's going to bring you together, not the fact that you both love sushi or whatever. Like, I was looking for the wrong things to correlate. So I always tried to pick people that were artists every time, which doesn't always work out because I met a lot of egotistic, not great people that weren't, because we had completely different principles. You know, that's part of the reason I clung to my American nightmare, was because he was an artist. He was an amazing painter, a really talented writer, incredible circus performer. He was just amazing artistically. So I kind of thought, well, I'm an artist, so then this must work. But actually, we had completely different principles. We didn't believe in the same things. Our standards of how we would treat another human being were completely out of alignment. So therefore, it doesn't actually matter how many paintings he's going to do that I think are great, because it doesn't bring us together, like, emotionally.
No, 100% that.
Yeah.
Morals and values are like the core, aren't they, of like everything. And I think that's it. I mean, I have a love-hate relationship with online dating because of that reason. I feel like you can't connect with people, but at the same time, like, I feel like in this fast-paced world, like, where else can you? And it's just you know, I'm trying not to do the toxic masculine thing and just cut everything out. So I feel like, you know, we'll give it a try. But you did meet Rich online though, didn't you?
No, I actually didn't.
Oh,
so,
okay.
We met on a completely blind date. So my circus director at the time, I went out to some event thing with him, with some other performers, and I was telling loads of, like, you know, hilarious bumble date disaster. I mean, I'd been on some like real, like, you couldn't even make it up, like, disaster dates. And like, I mean, I won't go into it, but there's a lot. And I was telling some of these funny stories and just saying, oh my God, I go into these things like with the best of hopes, but I just don't know how I'm swiping the wrong way, obviously, with the wrong people. And then he was saying, I don't know how it came up, but his friend was Rich and they used to be drinking buddies. So Rich used to party a lot, drink a lot, was very, like, in the scene in the area we lived in, Birmingham. But he'd recently, like, about 5 or 6 months before this, quit drinking completely. Like, he still doesn't drink now, and had quit his job, like his big, like, you know, high rising, like, big corporate job, and quit to become a carpenter. And he wanted to go travel in his van and was going to travel around Europe on his own and, like, find himself. And he was like, oh, you should go on a date with my friend Rich, because you're going away. I was going to Belgium, he's going away in his van. And I think he now says, oh, I knew they were going to be, like, well connected, but I think he just thought it'd be like a funny story, like when my two disaster friends dated and it was awful or something. So he set us up on this date, and I didn't know what Rich looked like. I only knew he was called Richard and to wait for him at this certain tapas bar. So every guy that walked in, I was like, is he Richard? Like, I didn't know who he was. And I was thinking, oh God, this is going to be awful. And also from what he told me, I'm thinking, God, that's the exact guy I'm trying to stop dating. Like, I'm finding myself, and like, this person takes himself really seriously, and that's, like, you know, on his journey, but like in a way very unconsciously, was like the artist I kept dating. And then Rich walked in and was just like really chilled, and he didn't have a Birmingham accent. So I asked him where he's from, and turns out that we were both from Reading, and then our parents had, like, lived in the same, like, town near each other.
Oh my gosh, that's
all
mental.
these things, like, a mad amount of things that we had in common. And we just got on really well and had, like, an amazing date, and then it just kind of went from there. But yeah, so obviously the guy that matched us up is, like, takes full credit for, like, how everything's turned out. But and now we're engaged, and I'm due having twins, and we've got Isaac sleeping upstairs, we've got a toddler, and we live in Devon, and, you know, we traveled around it. We did travel together around Portugal and Europe, and but yeah, I would say, you know, I went into that day probably thinking it's going to be like every other guy I'd met online. And I don't know how many hundreds of Bumble dates I've been on, but it was a lot. And yes, but we didn't actually meet online in the end. So maybe it was a good thing, because I kind of went into it not knowing anything about him, which meant I was quite open to finding out who he was.
That's what I think is nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the humanness. I think I speak about this quite a lot. It's that human connection that I think we're all craving, you know, and I think you don't get that with online. But equally, I've got, like, one of my friends just got married a couple of weeks ago, and they met online, and they are perfect for each other. Like, even in person, you know, when I met them together a few times, I'm like, you guys are just meant for each other. So the universe works in mysterious ways, doesn't it? But I think ultimately, when we're ready, the right person shows up. And I think that's evident even from, you know, you're saying in the relationships with friends and all of those things. And we are the mirror, aren't we? So I think that is all tied in. But I guess for the listeners listening, what would be, like, any advice that you would give to people, like maybe they keep finding the same type of partner or whatever? I feel like you've embedded it in, but just to round off, to give like a clear call to action.
I would say that even with all of I'm dating loads of different types of people. Like, I would always say this, which was rubbish. Like, I would definitely had not a type. I mean, maybe there was like correlation between them, but I was going for a certain type of date. So I would think, like, if I look back on all the dates that were proposed by people that I was chatting to on Bumble, they were like exciting dates. Like, one guy was like, oh, let's go meet all these like husky puppies, and then we'll like go to this like rooftop thing, and then, oh my God. And I just go along thinking, oh, this is a bit of an adventure. But then funnily enough, the date would be a one-hit wonder, and we just wouldn't see each other again, or they'd be really intense and trying to sweep me off my feet like I was talking about earlier, or whatever. And actually, I think sometimes it's just look for the people that you're going to fall into step with, not the people that are trying to impress you straight away. Like, Rich didn't try and say anything clever. He didn't talk to me about being a bendy dancer, which was refreshing. He didn't talk to me about like, he was interested in my performing life, but in like a, so what's your job kind of way, not in a, oh, that's a shiny thing. And like, then thinking, I can tell someone I dated a dancer or whatever. Like, look for the people that you fall into step with, and that you don't feel self-conscious when you're messaging and thinking, oh, what they're thinking, because really it should just be an extension of a friendship. And it's not that easy to find, because unfortunately dating, and particularly dating apps, are set up for essentially trying to impress somebody in as short a period of time as possible. But also, if I look back to what I was putting out there, my dating app profiles, some of them were like my, like, I don't know, professional shots, like from performing and stuff like that. And then I'd complain, oh, they just want to date a dancer. And I'm like, well, then that's what I was putting across. So actually, I was bringing it, it's that same thing of taking responsibility. Instead of blaming the people I'm dating, well, what did I think was going to happen if I put professional modeling pictures on a dating app, and then that's how they view me, and they estimate me to be that character or stereotype? What did I think was going to happen? Like, why wasn't I more comfortable to just put normal pictures of me, like, how I actually look, without editing or whatever? And then see who I connected with. And so I think, look for the people you fall into step with. And also, some of the best people, I did go on some great dates with people that I was never going to date again, but we just had a great conversation. But then I also met great people through some of the activities. So I worked as a life model for a long time. I met some really great people just who were just artists at a class. So sometimes, although, it sometimes will feel odd, just go along to a class or something you wouldn't normally go along to, or step out of your comfort zone, because you don't know who else might be there. And, working as a circus artist and a teacher, you're on your own most of the time. And I was in gyms on my own. I'd write in cafes on my own. I was mostly solo, so it was quite hard to meet people, which is why I turned to online dating. But I think I probably could have gone along to some classes of something else, or gone along to a poetry reading, or stuff that I was interested in that I just pursued online. And just look for the people that make you feel comfortable when you're in their presence, and don't feel, oh God, I hope they think, like, if they're making you feel, even if it's not that they're intending to, but you are feeling uncomfortable or self-reflective to the point of criticizing yourself, look at that. Because I think from the day I've met Richard, I've not felt like I needed to prove anything. And with some of the greatest friends I've got in my life, I've not felt that way. And so just sort of look at that. I think that is really the biggest guide, and probably the most the strongest advice I ever gave to anybody that I was ever supporting through Living Liberté was, I could have been given the biggest textbook, or anybody could have, like, look out for this, look out for that, this is bad, this is good. First of all, it would be invalid, because everybody has different boundaries. So for somebody, an open relationship is absolutely fine and healthy. For somebody else, that would be hell. And for somebody, they might feel fine with the fact their partner texts them all the time. Other people, that's not okay. We all have different boundaries, and maybe some of them need examining, but it's a fact. So that you can't have a how-to guide or like a book that tells you how to do it. You have to look at how you feel and be honest with your intuition. If you can tap into intuition, the rest of it is literally out in front of you. Absolutely. Like, whenever I switched off the intuition and was like, I'm just going to go with this, it's fine, then it never worked out. And when I listened to myself, it generally led me the right path. And I think that's probably like the best advice I could give, I think, or like framework.
Definitely. And I feel like that tied in both segments of what I like to cover, like the tips, but also like what's your soul-led message. And I feel like that was it. It's like listen to your intuition. And you know what's funny? That's such a common one with all of the guests I get in whatever caliber of whatever they do or life or whatever we're talking about. I think, you know, and I speak about this a lot about as a female, that is naturally just one of our strengths. That's a feminine energy thing that we have at our disposal at our disposal. And I think you know, the more we can connect to that intuition and listen to ourselves, because we know the answer, we know it already. And I think that's the beautiful thing. But equally, you know, life is for living, and we have to go through the ups and the downs. And sometimes, you know, you denying yourself of something at a certain point will just teach you something that maybe will make sense later. So I think and you can
change it anytime. Like, you know, I went on a million terrible dates, had 2 really hurtful, harmful relationships, but that didn't mean that I couldn't meet Richard, and it also just didn't mean that I couldn't be happy even if I hadn't met Richard. Like, you know, it's all part of the fabric of it. That's what I was saying. And you can't just want to go back and delete it or regret anything. Like, some of those disasters end up being great anecdotes, like, you know, like, and then in other instances I learned something when I allowed myself the time to learn from it. It was usually when I got the most out of it. And just checking in with yourself. Like, you know, I wrote like an ebook thing a while ago, and like about for Living Liberty. And part of it was trying to encourage people's intuition. And so sometimes it's just a case, literally the simplest thing. If you're on a date and even if you think it's going well or for whatever, it's totally fine. And like, wouldn't be a noticeable thing to just say, I'm just going to go to the bathroom quickly, or just go to the toilet, or whatever. And just sit in there with yourself and just take like a few breaths and just sit, like, just like take a sec, drink some water. Because sometimes we get like lost in the moment, or the excitement, or the thrill, or like we think they're really handsome, or whatever it is, or they've said something brilliant that we think's like life-changing. But sometimes if you just take a few seconds to think, why am I so excited at this like thrill level? And is it because I'm grabbing at this and I want it to be better than it is? Or is it actually just that we're really connecting? And just by like allowing yourself a few minutes of time, you'd actually probably, like, there's moments I definitely needed to do that in the past and didn't, and then got myself swept along when I shouldn't have been. So it's just allowing yourself time. Like, it's, you know, or it's fine to say like, oh, I'm actually going to call it a night, but I'd love to see you again. Somebody who really wants to see you again will see you again. If they're thinking, oh, well, I thought we were going to stay out longer, or I thought you were going to come for a drink and you didn't, they're not your people.
Absolutely.
So it's okay to take your time. Like, there's no hurry. And I don't know, I guess the biological clock is like a stress, and culturally with women, it's like, oh, you're past this certain age. Like, do you not want to settle down? Like, there's all these pressures. Actually, there's literally no timeline for anything. Like, I always wanted to adopt and kind of thought like, well, I'll just do that. And so it took the pressure off the having kids thing, which I never thought I'd end up having 3 of my own, but there we go. And then, you know, you can have your own timeline. And I think that slowly, very slowly, is starting to become a bit more normal now for people to realize you don't have to follow a certain pattern. You can actually just live the life you want, which is very liberating. But yeah, just take the pressure off, I think.
Absolutely that. Yeah, you're so right. And I think that's a nice way to close as well. Like, there doesn't need to be any pressure. You can take it all off and just be in that feminine energy, be it. But we will put your links into the ebook and stuff if it's still up, because then
I've still got all of it. I still leave it all online.
Amazing. We'll share all of that, so then whoever's listening, if they are in a difficult situation or they need guidance or anything with that kind of thing, and they can find your details and everything through that. But thank you so much for joining me, Helen. I know that there's going to be people listening in, just being like, I needed to hear that today. And a lot of the time we know these things, right? And it's just when you hear it again in a certain way, it might be that moment for someone to walk away from something toxic, or whoever knows. But thank you for your time.
All right.
Sherisse Bisram, Inner Power Activation Leader for Women. If you are ready to up-level, to elevate, to ignite your inner flame, to burn everything you once were, to trailblaze into your future, into all of your manifestations and more, then head to my website to book a free 30-minute alignment call. I have one-to-one containers available for 90 days and 180 days. I also have an online program for 6 weeks. It's a group program for women called Permission to Shine. That's also available as a self-study as well. I have a journal available on Etsy as well as worksheets. There's multiple ways to work with me, and I'm here to help you. You deserve to shine, to be the most amazing, most confident, fearless version of yourself. What are you waiting for?